I'm now going to continue my video series on Henry Ward Beecher and his sermons by continuing my discussion on the topic of war. Now, some people think that increased intelligence can put an end to war. Really? Take a look at Adolf Hitler and all his soldiers back in World War II. That ought to tell you something right there. And there are other people who think that more entertainment can put an end to war. Really? There should be absolutely no violence whatsoever in the United States right now if that were true. And we all know that's not true. So, there you go. And look at all the entertainment options we have here in the United States. You would think that there would be no more violence anywhere. But it doesn't work that way. There are other people who think that increased commerce will put an end to war. Really? Look at all the commerce that goes on here in the United States. But yet we still see violence. Okay? Remember, when theology is involved, neither commerce, intelligence, or entertainment will stop theology wars. Doesn't work that way. Okay? It's not textbook facts that will place an end to wars. It's godly moral education that will put an end to all wars. Okay? It's the education you get out of the Bible that finally puts an end to wars. It's your 10 Commandments that puts an end to wars. That's what does it. It's the saving grace of Jesus that puts an end to wars. That's what does it. Nothing else will work. I promise you. Okay? As a matter of fact, when Jesus comes back to earth, and one day He will deliberately place an end to all wars because he will ascend to His rightful place as King of all the earth. He is the King of earth because God Himself has appointed Jesus to take the throne that once belonged to His father David. Okay? You get the idea. Alright. Now, often, intelligent men and women think themselves better than their less intelligent counterparts. Think about that. I mean, look at the college universities. You'll see people at those college universities that will look down on people that work at a restaurant. That's not right. See what I mean? So that's a very bad attitude for these college graduates to have, especially considering the fact that a lot of these college graduates, when they get out of college, may not get a job right away. They might not find any gainful employment, despite their intelligence. Just because you have a bigger brain doesn't mean you get to now suddenly look down on others. Jesus had a great big brain. But did He look down on other people? No, He didn't. He didn't. And if we're to follow the example of Jesus, we're not to do that. Okay? Now then. Now, here's another thing. Peace can never exist without justice. There are lots of people that want peace on a regular basis. But they're willing to allow people to do all kinds of dastardly things to achieve that peace. Oh, don't pick on that guy despite the fact that he's robbing a bank. Don't do anything to him because we want to keep the peace. Heaven forbid that you would turn in so-and-so person when they rob a bank because, after all, you don't want to disrupt your peace or anybody else's. That's called a pansy. Okay? Those kind of people are pansies. Oh, don't mess with the social norms. Don't bring up topics like adultery or thievery or cold-blooded murder. Oh, so what if that guy knocked off 3 people? Don't tell anybody. You might ruffle some feathers. Even when it's something as simple as lying. Well, that guy deliberately lied to that other person. But don't confront him on it. Because after all, we have to keep the peace. That's not real peace. Okay? Okay? When you know somebody has done something wrong, you deal with it. You deal with it by turning it into the proper authorities. You see what I mean? Yes, you do bring it up. but you bring it up in a proper Christian way. You go to the authorities, you say, this person has lied to that person. This person has robbed from that person. So what if there may be repercussions? If there are, God deals with that. That's God's job. Okay? If you know somebody's stealing from somebody else and you turn into the police and the person that's trying to steal says, hey, I'm going to exact retribution on you because you turned me in, then you turn that over to God and you say, God, that guy has every intention of giving me repercussions because I turned him in for stealing. Then God deals with it. That's God's job. Not yours, not anybody else's. You leave that in God's capable hands, and God will deal with that. Okay? You may not know how God deals with that, but that's not important. The important thing is God will deal with that. If you do the right thing, and the person you're doing it onto stands there and says, hey, there are going to be repercussions because you did this. Turn that over to God. Say, hey, God, listen. This guy is threatening repercussions on me. Is that what you want? And God will handle it in His own way. Remember, God Himself is not subject to human authority. Okay? You are, I am, but God isn't. And He'll do whatever He wants, despite what any of us have to say. Okay? That's how God operates. All right. Now, peace at any cost is the same as trying to relieve pain from a terminal illness without trying to cure the illness. You'll treat the symptoms, but you'll never stop the pain. See what I mean? Some people want peace at any price. And often they want peace despite the human suffering that is going on all around them. To them, it doesn't matter if some people are being enslaved or brutally beaten or even in some cases, like back in World War II, when people were getting slaughtered. Doesn't matter. Keep the peace. Keep the peace. Those people are pansies. Okay? Do not associate yourself with them. When there's something wrong, you go to the authorities. You tell them what's going on. Now, if the authorities do nothing about it, then you go up to the throne of God Himself and say, God, what do you want done with this? And God Himself will deal with it. If the authorities won't deal with it, God will. But that's His business, not yours. Okay? See what I mean? Alright. And believe me, God totally despises pansies. Okay? He won't put up with them. And if God doesn't deal with pansies here on earth, He'll deal with them at the great white throne judgment. That's where He'll deal with them. So like I say, if you know somebody is stealing or brutally harming somebody, say, you know that there's some kind of a domestic disturbance going on, okay? And you know that's going on, and you turn to the authorities, and the authorities do nothing, you go to the throne of God, you go to the elders of the church, and you tell them, there is something horrible going on, and we need to bring this to the throne of God. And when you do, God then acts. Because remember, you may be subject to the laws of this land, but God isn't. And He'll deal with it in His own way. And that's how God deals with things. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, and I will repay in His own unique way. That's how God handles things. And all you have to do is read the Old Testament, and you'll find out how God handles things. Because like I said, God is not subject to human authority. You are. I am. God isn't. That's the way it works. Okay? Now, there are some people in this world that read material written by Charles Darwin, and they are trying desperately to find some kind of an outward link between mankind and their animal counterparts. Okay? They're trying to show that we evolved from animals. Jesus, on the other hand, says, don't look on the outside, because on the outside, we are not animals. Okay? It's our inward characteristics that make us whether we are animals or not. Okay? It's who we are on the inside that makes us either godly men or animals. If you want to look for animalistic anything, look on your own character. Okay? That's why they call some people savages. It's not because of what's on the outside, it's because of what they think and feel on the inside. That's what makes them savages. The real animal nature of man is on the inside, not on the outside. We're not monkeys. I know a lot of people think that we are monkeys, but we're not. But if we give in to an animal characteristic, then that makes us savages. And God doesn't condone savages. Okay? Now, only godly studies and the infilling of the Holy Spirit can cause us not to be savages. That's the only thing that can cause us not to be savages. Now, some people will claim, hey, I'm moral this, I'm moral that. But if you look deep down inside, because they don't have the Spirit of God in them, they become savages. Maybe not this way, maybe not that way, but there's some way that even though they are as moral, whatever as they claim to be, they are in their own respect and in their own right savages. You don't believe me? Talk to them for a while and you'll see it for yourself. Only the Holy Spirit can cure your savage nature. Okay? Now, it is true that when you become a part of a team or a part of an organization, or you get yourself employed, that you'll be less likely to go to war with anybody. And when lots and lots of people become members of teams or organizations, or even get themselves employed, there's less chance of war. And that's because war is not necessarily good for commerce. Think about it. How are you going to ship packages from one place to the next if when the package is en route, it gets attacked? It's not a good way to go. So, the more commerce you have, the less likely there's war. But just because it's less likely doesn't mean it's not likely at all. You can still have wars. See what I mean? Now, remember, if people are occupied with fighting wars, they are probably not occupied with building things. Building houses, building cars, building bridges, building roads, building this, building that. The more war there is, the less likely they're going to be. The only thing they're going to be building at that time are tanks and helicopters and airplanes, and you get the picture. Those kind of things go up, but nothing else does. So war is really not good for commerce. That's true. But belonging to a Christ-led church is one of the best ways to prevent war. You know, Jesus himself said, when two or more people come together in prayer in my name, well, it's kind of hard to fight your neighbor if you're coming together with him in prayer. You have to actually care about that person to pray with them. That's the way it works. How are you supposed to pray with somebody if you don't give a dang what happens to them? If you hate their guts, it doesn't work that way. That's the Christ-led unity we're talking about here. When you bring a problem to the elders of a church, well, you can't hate the elders of the church and bring a problem up to them. It doesn't work that way. See what I mean? So belonging to a Christ-led church is a good way to prevent war. Okay? Christ himself was and continues to be, through the Bible, one of the most ultimate teachers of teamwork. If you want to really learn about teamwork, read the Bible. It works that way. And those who follow the teachings of Christ avoid war like the plague. They don't want war. They'll fight if they have to, but they'll do everything they can to avoid war. They are the true peacemakers. Now keep in mind, just because they do what they can to avoid war doesn't mean they don't deal with situations. There's a big difference in that. Christians themselves are about peace and justice, not just peace. They're not pansies. Christians are not pansies, but they are the peacemakers. If you don't believe me, if people follow the example of David when he was dealing with the two mothers and the one baby, he was seeking justice and peace at the same time. And he did a very good job of it. He had the wisdom of God himself. Well, it wasn't really... I'm sorry, it wasn't David, it was Solomon. I am so sorry about that. It was Solomon who did that. But the wisdom of Solomon was clearly shown in the story of the two mothers and the one baby. If you don't believe me, just take a look at the Bible and see what Solomon did about that. It's very interesting. But he sought peace, and he also sought justice all at the same time. There wasn't any more need for war. Solomon settled it, and in the most wise and unique way. Okay. Now, God himself does not tolerate stagnant ponds. The only thing that a stagnant pond will attract is mosquitoes. That's true. Okay? God motivates people to progress and move forward. And when they don't progress and they don't move forward, God will send you additional motivation to get you to move forward. That's the way it works. Stagnant people are more likely to become discontented and wage war. So that means you have to continue learning, you have to continue growing, you have to continue to be more of what God wants you to be. And if you don't, well, you know, God will continue to motivate you until you do. Okay? Now, a good reason to wage war is to stop human suffering. That's what we did in World War II. That's what the United States and Europe did in World War II when they went to war with Germany. Human suffering was going on a mass scale in Germany. And so the United States and Europe went into Germany and stopped the suffering that was going on in Germany. If you don't believe me, look at the history books. It'll tell you exactly. That is a good reason to start war. Okay? To alleviate human suffering is a good reason to start war. It's one of the few good reasons to start a war. Unfortunately, far too many times, various governments will start wars because of some kind of a symbol or a crown or, hey, it's patriotism. You don't start a war because of patriotism. You don't start a war because of a crown or a piece of land. Okay? That's not what you do that for. You do that to alleviate human suffering. That's a good reason to go to war. Alright? You don't start wars to gain possessions. You start wars to alleviate human suffering. This is what started the Civil War. This is what started World War II. And there are other wars that were started because of human suffering. And those governments wanted to put it into that human suffering, and that's why they went to war. Like I said, that's only one of the very few reasons why anybody should ever go to war, is to try to alleviate human suffering. See what I mean? So, do Christians go to war? Well, if it's to alleviate human suffering, they have to do it by God's direction. If you look at the Old Testament, the way it's really put down, every war that God condoned, and God did condone battles, He really did, but every one of them was God-guided. Okay? God said, they did. And often, when Israeli soldiers, back in the Old Testament, would go into battle, before they'd ever get to the battlefield, often God had already dealt with the situation before they even got there. There was a couple of times when God Himself dealt with the opposing army before these people ever showed up. Because on a normal basis, God doesn't want you to go to war. Rare is the time that God will ever call you to go to war. And if He does, He has a specific reason, and He'll want you to do very specific things. Nothing more and nothing less. On a normal basis, God doesn't want you to go to war with anybody. But if He does call you to go to war, He'll tell you what to do, where to go, and you'll do it God's way. Now, to understand how God works, you have to read the stories of the Old Testament. Like I said, a lot of times when God would call the Israelites to go to war, God had already done most of the battle before they ever showed up. It was like, well, hey, I'll take care of most of it, and then you just mop up the mess. And a lot of times, they didn't have to do a dang thing. They showed up to battle, they were fully armed, and God had already taken care of the situation. That's the best way to go. Because, like I said, God Himself deals with the situation. A classic example of this was the 10 plagues of Egypt. Remember, the Israelites didn't go to war with the Egyptians. God Himself went to war with the Egyptians. He says, look, you're going to let my people go, and if you don't, there will be consequences. And God sent 10 sets of consequences to the Egyptians to force the Egyptians to let go of the Israelites. That's what He did. Anyway, sorry about my alarm clock. So like I said, more often than not, if God calls you to go to war with anything, usually God has already dealt with the situation before you show up. And that was actually true in one specific instance of the Bible, and I'm sure you guys probably know what I'm talking about here. The Israelites showed up to the battlefield, and all the opponents were already gone. It's like, well, why do we bother even getting ourselves armed and ready to go? God already took care of it. Because God wants to handle those situations, not you. Rare is the time that God will ever want you to handle any kind of situation. And that's the truth. More often than not, if God says, hey, prepare for war, more than likely by the time you reach the battlefield, God's already dealt with the situation. He was saying, oh, I did all this for nothing. That's okay. So, if there is a situation at hand, before you do anything, before you arm yourself to do anything, you go to God first, and you say, hey, this is the situation. Do you want me to do anything about it? And if so, what do you want me to do about it? So, and that's the way it is if you join up with the military. Before you go out and do anything, you wake up and you say, Lord, is there something you want me to do today? And if so, what is it? And you follow God's instructions. And He'll show you the way. He has a unique way of showing you the way. And sometimes, like I said, actually most of the time, God's already dealt with the situation before you show up. So now you're sitting there going, well, I got this uniform on, I got all this equipment on, and I don't have to do a dang thing. God's already dealt with it. And that's God's preferred method. So, do Christians go to war? Yes, but they go to war under God's direction. They do what God tells them to do. And a lot of times it's just basically dressing up and going to the battlefield. They usually don't have to do anything once they show up. Like, gee, I got all dressed up for nothing. Yeah. Because God's already dealt with it. So, there you go. So, if you ever join up with the military, okay, if any American decides to join up with the military, the first thing they should do is they should talk to God first and see what He wants you to do and where He wants you to go. And like I said, most of the time, He's already dealt with the situation before you even show up. So you say, oh, gee. So, anyway, I guess my final points is, when you have a situation, don't be a pansy. Turn into the proper authorities, and if they refuse to do anything about it, you go to the throne of God and let God handle the situation. Because God Himself is not subject to human authority. God will handle it His own way. And more importantly, and I'll say it again, just because you get educated doesn't mean that that's going to put an end to war. Commerce will not necessarily put an end to war. And being constantly entertained is not going to put an end to war. They help, but they won't necessarily put an end to war. The things that should be encouraged are God-filled churches, okay? And teamwork as Christians. Christian teamwork should be encouraged. That's what should be encouraged. The more Christian you are, the more you're in a God-filled church, the less likely you'll go to war, and the ones that you're associating with will also go to war. The less likely they'll all go to war, because you can't pray with somebody you're at war with. It doesn't work that way. So, godly teamwork is the true solution to war. Okay, so it's not that war should be averted like the plague. It should be dealt with by God's authority. Let God decide if He wants you to go to war. And if He does, let God decide where you're to go, what you're to take with you. After all, take a look at the battle of David and Goliath. There's a good example right there. David brought a slingshot. He picked up 5 stones. And God says, hey, you just hurl the stones and I'll take care of the rest. And that's all He did. Gee. I wish our modern wars were as simple as what David had it. So, don't be a pansy, but do everything by God's instruction, not your own. Don't take matters into your own hands. Do what God tells you. You say, well, how do I know what God wants me to do? You read the Bible correctly, and you follow the guidance of God. That's how you handle it. Alright. I will tell you more in a future video, so I want you to stay tuned.